Hello, my name is Sarah Omar, and I'm an assistant professor in Arabic and Islamic Studies here at Georgetown University. I'd like to welcome you to our series where you get to meet scholars and hear them discuss their intellectual journeys. My guest today is Dr. Amina Wadud, visiting professor at National Islamic University in Indonesia. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Thank you very much, Doctor, for having me. It's my pleasure. I really look forward to talking about this journey for me because actually, as a Muslim by choice, my academic journey began the first time I read the Quran, and I fell in love. And I fell in love with a translation that today I can no longer abide by. But at the time, I identified as a kind of nerd. Reading was my hobby. I used to put that on forums, like, what's your hobby? Because I come from a family that is not educated, a very poor family. And other than a brother who went to a community college, I'm one of 8 siblings, none of whom went to the university. And here I am with 3 degrees. So I think my path in education already caused me to stand out from my family. So I didn't feel shy at the time to say that reading is my hobby. You know, I didn't do sports or, have any artistic talents. So just to be a reader at that level was already something, exceptional. So when I came across the Quran, just in an English translation, within a few months of taking Shahada. Now, for me personally, I would have made this the first thing, but the course of conversion is strange in the world. So I came into Islam out of a multiplicity of motivations, but I tell people today the thing that keeps me in Islam really is the Quran and also the principle of Tawheed that I understood through the Quran. So falling in love with something does not a path make. I didn't even have an intention to dedicate myself to the study of Islam academically. I just took whatever courses, and of course Arabic, as an undergraduate at that time. But at the next sort of cornerstone of life's path, where you have to turn someplace, I decided to go back to school for graduate studies. And I was thinking maybe I'll do journalism because I want to travel and, see the world, talk about things. And a friend of mine who was also a convert, he said, you should really go for the study of Islam because no one had a love for learning about Islam the way you did when you first became Muslim. So, there were chance of events that led to me accepting that that's where I should go. So I applied for graduate school. Once again, I did not have at that time a clear plan with regard to what I was doing. However, my love for the Quran lingered, alhamdulillah, it still lingers. And I eventually sort of pushed myself into that corner, even though there were no footprints in the sand. There was no course of action for me to do a gender reading of the Quran. And at that time, I would not have even known to call what I was doing that. I know it now, retrospectively. What I wanted to do was to remove all the impediments between me and understanding this word of God, to understand this text. So my graduate studies took me on a number of steps that would prepare me for that. Obviously the Arabic, and I went to immersion courses in Cairo. I even sat with a professor whose area was Quranic studies, one-on-one for 2 semesters, took a course at Al-Azhar. These were all steps that would lead me on a journey that had no markers. Because the final bit about this journey was to look back and see that I had no female teachers and that I had no one who was engaging in gender. The only way that I survived was that I had a professor of linguistics who introduced me to the field of hermeneutics. And then I knew that I wasn't making it up, that the way we engage with a text has a lot to do with who we are when we come to that text. And I was coming to this text as a Black woman from America. And I wanted the text to fulfill what it describes itself to be, which is universal guidance for all who believe. So I thought, well, how is this working for me? And what are the indicators within the text where it's working? And what is the distinction between the text and a whole, more than a millennium of scholarship with regard to it? Well, one of the things that came out of it was learning that there had been no written record left by women with regard to their encounters with this text for over 1,000 years. And I thought, oh, maybe something's missing here. So I think what I did was take from my heart towards filling in something that later turned out to be quite revolutionary and in fact quite necessary in the context of academia and scholarships. But it was not a clear path. It was definitely something that I kind of made as I went along.
Well, given the scope of your scholarship and you've had such a long and productive career, what type of questions have you been asking, and how have those questions changed over time as the fields are also changing?
Yes, I'm really happy to see that there are new developments. Right now I'm working on queer Islamic thought, for example, and queer reading of the Quran, which was not something that was on my mind, even reading for gender. But because, again, I didn't know where I was going, I didn't realize until the last 10 years, so it's not like it's that recent, I didn't realize until the last 10 years how important reading for gender is to all of the Islamic corpus. But the first question that I had inadvertently, in a very naive and innocent kind of way, was understanding the places where the Quran was specific with regard to al-mu'minina wal-mu'minat, believing men and believing women, and places where the Quran was generic, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, and places where the masculine plural is taken sometimes to be inclusive and sometimes to be exclusive. So I was trying to figure out, are we excluded in places, and is that intentional? And of course, the other question that came by and that shaped, the changes in my life was when I became engaged in Muslim women's reform movements, especially with regard to Muslim personal status law, because then I added another layer to the interrogation of the Quran and its analysis, and that was, where is it that women's lived realities are critical to how we read the text? And that was very powerful, because actually I saw that men's realities were encoded in much of the analysis, and certainly a lot of the policy and laws, or jurisprudence that came from it. But women's subjectivities were considered too subjective, too emotional, as if men are not emotional. And so using lived reality as an exegetical tool enhanced this reading for gender, because you have to ask the question, if this is a universal text, does it apply to everyone equally with regard to numbers of factors, including, ableism, class, race, gender, sexuality, gender orientation, language groups, age, etc. So now I believe that each of these sub-areas legitimately have a right to reinvestigate not just the text, but the text as it formulates communities. Because we have a relationship with this Quran, we have had a relationship from the very beginning, and yet not all of us in the community have been allowed to have our realities interact as dynamically and authoritatively with this text. So in these times, this 21st century, we are now speaking back. We're speaking back to the authorities. And one of the ways that we speak back is by doing this intricate and intimate reading of the Quran from our own localities. And once again, for me, the love factor just keeps going. You know, it just gets re-enhanced as I go along. So even though there are changes, the changes for me simply say, but of course we must go there as well. But of course we need to ask about that. Wow, I never even realized that that's a necessary part of the continued examination of how we keep a text alive and dynamic.
I'm wondering how your approach or methods in addressing some of the questions that you've asked have changed over time as your questions are changing.
I think the reading for gender became more clear to me after my first book, which is called Quran and Woman, but if I'd known better, I would have called it Quran and Gender. Because I didn't understand gender as a category of thought, even while it was a sort of a pernicious push. It was always there, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to name it. I didn't, so yes, coming to coherence about gender as a part of knowledge and knowledge production, that's huge. That's something that has evolved later. The other thing for me that has become really pivotal in terms of the change is I began working on sort of the theology of equality through what I call the Tawhidic paradigm. And using Tawhid, which is the Arabic word for the oneness, the uniqueness, and the unicity of God, using Tawhid as a rubric of understanding changed my faith. It changed my life. It placed me somewhere where even if I cannot understand the specifics in the Quran or in any Islamic text or in any Muslim context, even if I cannot understand the specific, I have this deep understanding of the necessity for harmony and beauty to result from this intimate relationship with our Creator, and as a result of that intimate relationship, to relate to other humans as if they are also intimately related to that Creator. And that has transformed me because it grew out of that process of using lived reality as an exegetical tool. So lived reality means every person matters. And if a person matters and there is incongruence between, so for example, the concept of justice is universally agreed upon by Muslim scholars, and yet the meaning of justice has changed. So to be clear on how we as living communities interact with a text, if we wish for that text to remain alive, but especially if we wish for that text to be transformative in how we do our laws and our policies, our culture, our spirituality, our faith, our identities, means that we must also engage in the ways that our lives are changing. In the past, it was even just to have slaves. That's untenable. So gender hegemony was the norm. It was not necessarily divine or sacred. And to remove that sacredness from a sort of ipso facto patriarchy has meant that for me, Tawhid has helped to align everything that I do with a vision of the universe that stems from my relationship and my belief in our Creator. And that means that I have sort of, the rope to hold on to that the Quran sort of talks about, hold on to this rope. I have a rope to hold on to in a way that serves me in the dark and in frightening places. And also that allows me to stand up to what I call the ethical embodiment, to take the role, for example, as the lady imam, and not be afraid, because it still aligns with Tawhid. It simply is incongruent with the history of patriarchy that has been rampant. So yeah, everything has had a very neat and yet at the same time compelling and dynamic interaction with the way that I engage text and I engage community, and also the way in which I try to nurture my faith and be a sign of nurturing and light for other people's faith.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wadud, for being with us. It's been such a pleasure having you, really. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.